Welcome to the Calgary Sessions. This is episode number 26. I'm your host, Jeff Humphreys. Today's guest will be a fun conversation. Her and I just recently connected. Her story instantly caught my attention just because the backstory is really cool. What she's up to right now is really cool. So this will be a fun one for me. Go ahead, introduce yourself, name, and what you're up to right now.
My name is Alena Jenkins, and I am a cannabis entrepreneur, one of the first in history, which is really cool.
Isn't that crazy to say out loud?
Yeah, that is really cool to say out loud. I'm also the chair of the Bridgeland Business Improvement Area, and I sit on the board for the Alberta Cannabis Council as well.
Cool. So you're like deep into it.
Yeah. Where do I find the time? I'm not really sure, but I somehow squeak it all in there.
And that's why this will be a very interesting conversation. Like we talked about quickly off camera, like, you know, the opportunities. Now is the time to talk about this. Like it's actually.
Yeah. It's bizarre to have gone from for so long not being able to speak about it at all publicly anyways, to now here I am sitting on a podcast and this will be kind of the first time that a lot of it comes in the public's eye, which I think is really fun and a cool experience.
Totally. And that's why this is going to be, and it's going to be educational for me too. And just because the whole space it moves so quick, there's so much going on. You're way into it. So this will be, it'll be really cool. Mm-hmm. So the gist of the show is I let the guests go back as far as they want to go. Usually that kind of takes them to a spot kind of growing up, how they grew up, their inspiration, your inspiration back in the day, whether it's school, arts, business. So yeah, go back as far as you want to go. And just to a point that actually you kind of remember of like, oh yeah, I started to make some, I started to think a certain way.
Totally. So to kind of give a little bit of backstory, I've kind of had my foot in both ponds, so to speak, my whole life. So I was originally born in Calgary, but I was raised out on the coast, and I actually lived on a border town right between Washington State and British Columbia. And out on the West Coast, cannabis culture has been, it's been there. It's been very forefront for many, many years. So I kind of grew up in a culture in which it wasn't really stigmatized as much as it is elsewhere. Even when I would come back to Calgary and visit, it was a very different vibe when it came to that. It was kind of my first experience where I felt that stigma. Meeting somebody in an alley was a terrible experience. And so that kind of in those formative years, I think was a really interesting time for me to grow up on a border. So to understand, the legalities of that and the repercussions of this plant, which was perceived in my world as a plant, not much more than that.
Sorry. And I'm going to interrupt you all over the place. When you say in your world, does that mean just your environment you grew up in, or the friends you were hanging with, or the things you're interested in?
Probably a culmination of all of those things. In BC, again, very culturally appropriate. Cannabis was, more people smoked pot than they did cigarettes. And so I think that just culturally existed. Even in my family doesn't drink alcohol so very often anyways. So cannabis was always kind of in our family. I didn't know about that until a little bit later, but
so okay, all right.
I think that's just how it is. So when I say in my world, I think even just friends, that border scenario, culturally around me, whether that's all around BC, and so that's kind of what I meant by that.
Okay, that makes sense. So when you're or the early days, whether it's junior high and high school, are you kind of just going about your business? Are you into sports? Are you kind of like friends, like just a regular upbringing?
Totally.
Yeah.
Well, yes and no. Again, as I said, I I had places all over the place. So how does that affect a person when they're young? I think that I was very adaptable at that time as well, to changing scenarios and almost that kind of professionalism. Again, going through that border sometimes twice a day. I actually went to school in Canada, but I lived in the States. So kind of all of those things combined was very interesting. And then as I started kind of maturing, I suppose, I always had to have kind of creative solutions for things growing up on that border. Like how then cannabis started coming into my life in my later teens, and I couldn't keep crossing the border. So I actually moved out a little bit early when I was young to live in Canada full time. So I wasn't, combating my lifestyle, which was a little bit hippie, I suppose, at the time. I was big into longboarding and being on the beach and out in the mountains with my dogs all the time. And that was kind of where I was at. So then moving out was actually one of the more interesting times, because that's also the same time where I started getting creative. And that's kind of where I think where all that creative energy goes into creating new ways of doing things, I suppose.
How young were you?
I was 16 at the time.
When you moved out? So what grade is, so you still, when you moved to Canada, are you still in school, or did you like?
Yeah, okay. I was. And so then I was always an honor roll student. I was always really smart, but I was just over it at that point. So I got really creative, and I looked at my dual citizenship and everything else. My parents and I, you got that teen angst and trying to figure it out. And so I actually found that if I stopped going to school in Canada and I went to school in the States, I actually had most of the credits that I needed. I just needed to do a couple of core courses. Yep. And so I discovered all this, came up with this plan, and said to my folks, I said, hey, if I graduate school and I save up enough money, you guys have to sign this paperwork that says I can travel abroad. And, they say, go for it, Alena. Yeah, right. So yeah, I did that. I transferred over. I did some core courses online. Meanwhile, I was also working in the food industry, which I know you have similarly.
Yeah, we'll go there.
Yeah. And that's when I approached them at I was just about to turn 17, but I wasn't quite 17 yet. And I said, here you go. I did it, And me and my girlfriend took off to Central America, and we were that young. So
when you look back at that, were you super young but like mature and young? Like, do you laugh about it now, or like, how do you?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, it was the best thing for me, for sure. It was exactly what I needed. My relationship with my parents got so much better. My own mental fortitude got so much better. Everything that was it needed to happen for me. I wouldn't necessarily recommend that for most teenagers.
I could never have done that.
But I ran out of money that trip. There's lots of learning curves. But it was that formative time that from then on out, that's kind of where I feel like my adulthood has always done. I've figured out how to do it despite of the odds maybe stacked against me in some way, or however you want to perceive that, I suppose.
And you talked about creativity, which is interesting. When you say, obviously a problem solver is being creative, were you creative in the arts, or is it just,
Yeah, for sure.
That was your spot?
Yeah, I've always kind of had a foot in both ponds. I've been fairly athletic, but I've also been fairly artistic as well. Yep. Between writing, I did a lot of photography. My career did go that career route for a while.
Yep.
And that's kind of, we're kind of getting ahead of ourselves, but that's also kind of the homage that we have in FivePoint, which is my retail brand right now as well. So, yeah. So
when you come back from that trip, you're obviously back in Canada, broke.
Yep.
Probably.
Yep.
Are you thinking that is school your next move, or is it work, or where's your kind of head going at that point in your life?
Well, at that point, I did travel for a little bit longer.
How long were you gone for? Sorry, how long?
That first trip, I think, was gone for 8 weeks.
Okay.
It was pretty substantial for that time in one's life, For sure. Yeah, and but then I got back, and I definitely had that travel bug. That freedom that it gave me. And I subsequently went on to go travel to every continent except for Australia, mostly as a single woman, actually, through most of those travels.
Crazy.
Yeah.
Which is it's got to be a wild experience.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny because at the time I didn't think anything of it. I just did it. And none of my peers were in that place in their life. So it was just the way that cookie crumbled.
And your folks were just like, that's her just doing her thing?
Yeah. I think it was really awesome to have a supportive family that way. they're probably kind of glad to get rid of me in some ways too.
Because there's some days I'm sure you.
Yeah. But I went on and during that time in the travels, I think that, again, this is kind of the first time that I'm publicly able to talk about,
which is awesome,
some of that cannabis experience that was really intertwined in that. But again, I don't want to get too ahead of ourselves. Yeah. But
don't worry, I'll pull it back. So you just, wherever you want to go, don't worry.
So got back from that trip, did a few more trips, decided I should go back to school just to kind of see beyond, the grubby backpacker existence, what the future would hold. So I actually traveled to Europe and decided to do a 6-week culinary course.
Cool.
So I lived in France and studied food for 6 weeks.
Sounds pretty sweet.
It was awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was awesome. Of course, with every trip, there's some highs and lows.
Yeah.
And traveling alone, there can be lows for sure. But came back from that trip, decided that, working in a kitchen was not where I wanted to go with that. And moved downtown Vancouver. I think I was about 18 at this point.
Still young, eh?
Yeah, super young.
Crazy.
And went into photography school. And so that's kind of how that segues into the art side of things. So
did you always think that school is just something that you should go investigate? Did you know you needed it, or was it pressure to go try it?
Combination, for sure. Definitely my family encouraged me to go to school.
Yep.
But I've never really been super, I'm a huge proponent of life is your teacher to a degree. But I think that there is some great things that schooling can teach you, and just to show up and to be there, and that you won't get elsewhere.
Yep.
So I definitely value all of my experience and my learning lessons, and school is one of those for sure.
Yep. So photography.
Yeah.
Were you like dabbling, taking photos while you're traveling? You're like, oh, this seems like something kind of cool that
Yeah. I started in the dark room in high school. But, that's where I'd go when I was too stoned for the rest of school.
Now the truth's out there.
The dark room was dating myself with with film and all that. But and then from there, I always was taking pictures when I was traveling, and I really loved it. And I would even take pictures of food and weed actually was a big one. And I'd send a lot of those photos home kind of quietly at the time, because that was when digital photography was first coming out. Right. So it was kind of this taboo thing. But and then I went through photography school, which taught me, the whole gamut, everything from fine art photography to art reproduction to everything.
Cool.
And that kind of segued me into eventually becoming a food photographer. And I kind of amalgamated those two passions that I discovered while traveling, and product and food.
Yep.
But, and I love that. I was doing that full time up until kind of FivePoint really became a potential. So
did you know when you're going to photography school that you wanted to do your own thing afterwards? Like that drive to, obviously you have your own business right now, successful, doing this thing. You have a bunch of other things going on as far as like pushing where this industry is going. But have you always wanted to have your own thing?
Yeah.
Yeah. So like going to photography school, you can go there, get your education, then go work for a magazine or whoever.
And I did work for a magazine actually for a period of time.
Random. I chose that example.
Actually, I think a lot of that too is that, kind of we're talking about learning and how a person gets to where they are today. And that was always a big part of it too, is that, I didn't just go straight from school into having a career. I worked as an assistant under other photographers for quite a while. I did some internships with magazines. I did a lot of that sort of stuff as well. I actually did go to back to school even for more of a certificate program, but just to understand how to start small businesses in Canada.
No way.
And so that was always kind of that thought, and how I was going to learn from the people that are doing it.
Did you feel that? Like you knew that kind of going into all these different experiences, that you were just like pulling little nuggets of information for them to eventually.
Yeah. Like I was always destined to not work for somebody.
how can you say that? Like, how did you know that?
I think, if we go back to how I was already talking about how my parents were probably excited for me to leave,
Yeah.
it probably is in that same realm, where I always was a very strong-willed and strong-minded and hardworking person. So to work for somebody else and have your own vision, have your own desires, have your own dreams and aspirations, it's difficult to work within those parameters. You people like myself anyways generally work for people because they want to learn something more than they want a paycheck. And so I think that ultimately that was what I did. And I didn't make a lot of money in those formative years, but that wasn't why I was there. So
you were learning about the industry, best practices, techniques, learning from people that had been doing it longer.
Totally.
Just arming yourself with a bunch of knowledge so that you could go do your thing.
Exactly. And just keep that going and just piece it all together. It's only now that I'm starting to piece a lot of that together. Well, that's where that knowledge comes from, or that's how I knew that, or whatever. But for sure.
So where does the photography career kind of take you?
So at that point, photography it's a tough gig. It's a very tough gig.
Because everyone's doing it, and a lot of people do it for free.
Yep. And you're constantly selling yourself and why people should pay you. And so it's exhausting on multiple levels.
Yep.
Some months are financially great. Other months are completely dry. So learning how to budget, learning how to sell yourself, show up and do all those things was exhausting. It was fun. I enjoy it, but it was exhausting. And so for a while there, I was doing that, but obviously putting myself through school and stuff. Same with you. I had a hospitality background, and so and I love customer service and I love hospitality, and it helped me kind of go through school. And same thing, I worked at some really awesome like high-end places in Vancouver that took me from serving at a sushi restaurant at 14 to now serving at one of Vancouver's top tier restaurants when I was only 18, and this was a big deal, and I didn't have my wine designations, and I didn't have these sorts of things, and just learning as I go. And so with the combination of those two things, I think the photography really took a turn when I was able to kind of amalgamate those. And I actually started my own kind of consulting business, and I would work with their marketing teams and their chef teams and their front of house teams and kind of piece these pieces together and then give them a final product, which was often like their new menu rollout with photos, and their staff is trained, everything done. So that's kind of where that landed for a while. And then I got injured, and then my photography gear got stolen, and there's all these other little things that kind of happened along the way, but all in learning lessons, right?
Yeah, but not like little things that happened. Like they must have been big enough to stop you doing, besides getting your gear stolen. Like that obviously stops you, but do you think that, if your stuff didn't get stolen, if you didn't get hurt, would you be on a different path?
Probably. I mean,
it's hard to say, but based on your, how excited you were about that space, did you think you had your thing, like your?
I think I dipped my toes into a lot of different entrepreneurial endeavors. Some of them were fruitful. Some of them were not as much. So was that one the final destination for me? Probably not, because amongst all of this other chaos happening, there was always that kind of underground thing of cannabis has always been in my life, and that culture has always existed, and it's always been something that I've been involved in. So for me, when the idea of cannabis was becoming legal, and in BC, it kind of was a lot prior to here. There were stores and there were vapor lounges and there were these things. Once that was legitimately coming to, that I had that in my bullseye.
You could it had your attention, and you could see that was a path that you were going to get on.
Yeah, I was going to do it because, I did the things that with every other business plan I had put together. And some of the business plans I put together, maybe I overshot it, or maybe I didn't have the right team or whatever it was that made it so that it wasn't as profitable as I needed it to be. Cannabis just kept coming back to, not only is it profitable, it's something I believe in, and I had the support, I had the team, and that's really what pushed that through the goalpost.
When you say like business plans, are you like comfortable writing like giant? The only reason I'm asking, because I don't have that skill. I don't have the ability to like work through it in a logical manner and write all my thoughts down. I'm just more kind of like off the cuff, off the fly. The minute you said that, I was like, that's an interesting skill.
I think that people overcomplicate things, you know, because you said a big document, it doesn't have to be a big document.
Gotcha. It's just me being naive to what they actually are.
Well, no, I don't even think it is that. I think that people, a lot of wannabe or potential entrepreneurs, they delve into line by line and they go really far deep into it. But really, when it comes down to it, my mentorship always just took all of that I used to do and said, these are the numbers you got to focus on. These are the concepts you need to focus on. And really a business plan can be 2 to 3 pages max, maximum really. And that's, I think, changing that to that perception of what that looked like. It becomes a lot easier to run a profitable business at that point.
That makes sense. I wanted to circle you back to your hospitality stuff, because you're rattling off a bunch of words, whether it's customer service and everything you essentially do right now in your full 4 walls. So I'd love for you to go back to the kind of the restaurant stuff and just kind of what you were up to and what you were learning and how long it was.
It always stuck me back to, because when you're in the industry, it's really fast paced. It's really fun. There are some caveats to it, my body started to hurt after a while. Working off hours was a plus and a minus sometimes. But I do enjoy that energy. And that's kind of where, running into retail, there's a lot of things that are very similar. For sure. Customer service being the one, and attracting people. But my background really, though, was always in more of that marketing side of things.
Naturally, just like you kind of gravitated, you could see what the businesses, what they potentially needed or what they were, a weakness, and you could kind of connect some dots. Yeah,
for sure. And I did have some education in that too. We kind of glazed over that bit, but I did take some marketing courses and stuff that helped to bolster my photography at the time and those sort of things. So but yeah, it's just definitely like just a natural propensity of mine, I suppose. And marketing, even in terms of like I was creating drink lists and wine lists and stuff like that, and working with their bar teams, and it was just I would find these niches and we could plug it in, and it was usually a success, not always. But that's okay. We learn from our failures. And and so that's kind of how that all ties together. FivePoint was, I built everybody else's brands for so long that for me, this has been such a fun project to be able to take, that cannabis culture that I've experienced from everywhere from, learning about Rastafari culture in the Caribbean, to smoking hashish with Berber people in the Sahara, to, even just checking out weed fields in Monteverde in Costa Rica. I mean, there's so many different versions of that. I even visited with an American gentleman that was rotting away in jail in Thailand for cannabis. I mean, there's so many different experiences that have kind of shaped my perception of that plant. It's really just a plant, when we break it down. So being able to build a brand around that, and being one of the first ones in the history of humans to be able to do that is such a...
It's wild.
Yeah, it gives me goosebumps.
Which is super cool. So we're gonna like zero in on this right now. So when did you realize you were gonna go all in on cannabis? What was like the tipping point, or what was the point in your life you're like, that's it, everything else is gonna either just kind of go to the wayside, I'm going all in? Like, what was that? You remember that?
I don't really subscribe to that, actually. Right now I'm all in it, but I don't see my life like that, actually. I see that, I put a lot of my energy and my time into this endeavor,
Yep.
but it isn't my whole existence by any stretch of the imagination. It's just it's such a fun place to be, but there's more to it than that, for sure.
When did you decide to open up your own business? When was that? When was that moment?
That moment was, let's see. So the history of FivePoint, let's go back a little bit in there.
Yes.
That must have been in 2017. This must have been that year when it was kind of at that time where I was considering a gray market shop, because it was an industry in Vancouver for sure.
Yep.
But we're so close to that 2018, and there's so many rumors about it, that I sold my home, actually, is how this all came about. I sold my home and to fund this project. And so I sold that in 2017 and started the process of this crazy experience of getting this open. I mean, literally when we did our application, it was thick.
Crazy.
I think it was 293 pages.
Crazy. And this is me being, I don't know anything about the industry. 2018 was when the government of Alberta said we're gonna legalize this and you can apply for licenses.
Yeah. So October 17th, 2018 is when it officially became nationwide legal.
Okay.
And so there's a few different versions of the government. There's Health Canada, which is the federal government that's kind of creates the overarching regulations. And then each province is able to kind of read those regulations and come up with their own versions of that.
Yep.
AGLC, Alberta Gaming and Liquor Board, and Cannabis. They're the ones that kind of bring that down to a provincial level, and then each municipality can also chime in if they want to.
Gotcha.
So there's
layers,
yeah. For sure. And so I approached my dad, actually, and I said, this is what I'd like to do. He says, I'll partner with you in that. And that was the first time he'd ever
been on board with what you were like, a vision or direction.
Yep.
Awesome.
Yeah. So
which must have been a moment for you to have your dad back you like that, like just confidence or just inspiring or
totally.
Why do you think he said yes at this venture?
Well, I think that he strongly believed in the industry.
Yep.
He saw that as being a profitable way to do it. He knows my background in customer service and he knows that I can do that. And he trusted me. He's been completely hands off now that we're open. So it's been really great that way. Perfect partner to have. Totally.
Where did you, when you sold your house and then you approach your dad, so you're like, you can see exactly what you want to accomplish. Did you understand the amount of like things that would have to happen to get this thing off the ground?
There were so many unforeseen things in the beginning that, absolutely not. We were supposed to be open. We were actually one of the first 6 approved licenses in all of Alberta. We were not one of the first 6 open.
So when you say that the first 6, does that mean obviously you did all your homework, got that document together and got it in early?
Yeah.
And they approved you pretty quick?
Yeah. So in the beginning, it was based off of kind of first through the goalpost idea.
Yep.
So whoever had the right stuff that met all the things, you were approved. So yeah, when
you were really
early, like literally waiting at, that time to press the button. And I got to give my dad and his team kudos for that, because they really helped in that formative part to keep everything on track and that timeline. So I couldn't have done it without them, to be honest, because it was so difficult to just cross your T's and dot your I's, and make sure that you had everything lined up. So they really helped that way. And then
to get this thing, I can't imagine what they like.
Goosebumps.
Like I'm sure your whole body is on fire.
It was great. It was amazing, and we celebrated, we went out, and then the fallout of that happened, where approved on a provincial level, technically approved on a municipal level, but big old fashioned buts, there was some caveats. So I actually had to change the entire designation of the entire building that we were in. just because cannabis wasn't an approved use in a
Right.
direct control.
Yep.
So that process takes you into council, which we were opposed by the community association.
And so how, when this is all happening, is there anything open in Calgary yet? Or
Not at this time.
okay, because
This is early still.
very early.
This is still super early.
Okay.
This is prior to October 17th. Because they were like the legislation was coming into place. October 17th was when doors could be open.
Gotcha.
So this was kind of prior to that.
Okay.
And we had the approvals. We go through that. I have to do this changeover to get a development permit is really where I'm stuck at,
Yep.
which is normally a very simple thing,
Mm-hmm.
particularly just to do interior spaces. It's normally a very simple process, but
Yep.
this was not. So we go in with council. We barely make it out of there. We had to hire lawyers. We had to, come up with our own strategic plans and how, get their approvals for this and find out if we have enough parking and, just all the little pieces.
Mm-hmm.
Phew, we get through that. Great. Then now our development permit is approved. But what ended up happening in those early days was that if I got an approval, that meant anybody 300 meters around me automatically got refused because there was these rules about how close you could be.
Yep.
So then everybody, it's not just myself included, this is pretty much the entire city, went into a complete, can I say shit show?
Yeah,
on the
yeah,
show?
totally. Yeah, totally. You're in a safe place.
It was a complete shit show. So anybody who had been refused was now appealing that decision to refuse them, and at the same time appealing the decision to approve so-and-so.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, community members were involved. This is the first time coming out of, it was chaos. And so we had to go through this process. So then we weren't open for October 17th. We weren't open for January. We weren't open for February. There was such a lineup of these things. They were booking 4, 5, 6 months out in advance just to have your trial.
Crazy.
So that was a wild experience.
And while this is going on, what are you feeling? You're like, head down. We're still going to hammer through this.
Oh yeah.
There's only one outcome that you were going to be willing to.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, how do we do this?
Yeah.
And it was wild. Again, lawyers, a lot of PR on my behalf. I hit the ground and was asking community members and getting their signs of approval, and I had letters and letters and letters coming in.
And just on your own, you kind of came up with the idea that if I can kind of create an army behind me that's in my hood, that I can hopefully, maybe that'll just add to the ammunition to get this thing going forward.
Pretty much, yeah.
So literally just cruising around to all the different business owners and just kind of introducing yourself. Here's my idea, talking them through it.
Yep.
And maybe they give you a letter of.
Yeah, I had a template. I had it ready to go.
Yep.
Just sign at this line, if you approve of this.
Yep.
And it was actually really amazing to see how many people came to our aid.
Yep.
Not only was I hitting the ground like that, but people were interested in my story. I got on CBC a couple times, and
What do you think caught their interest? Obviously, being early to the market is a big check, but what was the hook?
I think that's the dominant story for sure. Is just, I think my story kind of encapsulates the gong show that it was.
Yep.
So it was an easy one to kind of communicate that way. And, from the support of everybody else that I had was outpouring. I mean, from just basic community members, just thinking it's the right thing to do, to like kind of the right wingers thinking it's her right to do business, like step off kind of idea.
Yep.
To the left wing cannabis enthusiasts, they're saying, heck yeah, we're finally here. Let her do her thing. So we had such an outpouring of support. It to me, that warmed my heart. I'd never really necessarily needed that amount of community before, and to see that amount of community come to my aid at that time and to push for me and the concept and the business and everything was just such a cool experience. Yeah, I can't even really describe it.
Because I'm thinking, and this is, you correct me, but when you're going to open up your business, you're just kind of focused on your four walls, your partnership with your dad, and like, I'm working on a business here. This is my thing.
Yeah.
But it's turned into this sense of community, which is
Yeah, it was huge.
way different.
And then, you know, part of that community, this will kind of segue way into the second part of this, was that part of that community was a lot of business owners in the neighborhood were coming up against similar issues, you know, whether that was specific community members, or in this case, we had a community association, which this is all water under the bridge now. So I kind of hate to rehash it, but, you know, that were causing them some trouble in some way. You know, they didn't have an association themselves. And so a lot of the business was kind of just left to their own devices, essentially. And so through that whole rigmarole and getting through all of that and actually winning eventually, we didn't open until August of 2019.
So almost
a whole year of
18 to 19.
paying rent.
All of it.
All of it.
Lawyers.
Yeah, yeah.
Everything going out the door.
Yep.
Nothing coming in.
No, not a dime coming in. So yeah, that was a headache, but kind of in through all that, I was just inspired to create a community for our businesses in Bridgeland. You know, and as earlier in this podcast, we talked about a foot in each pond, and, you know, my dad had always lived in Bridgeland. He actually helped with some of the community planning in some areas.
Cool.
He's a developer as well. So he developed the building that FivePoint is in, which is awesome to be there.
So cool.
And so there's this sense of
you're connected, like you're
really connected.
Yeah.
You know, yeah. It's
like at a way different level. This isn't just like opening up a business in a place. This is like you've created something that's very unique.
Yeah, yeah. And then the pandemic kind of hits as well, and this whole community becomes so much closer than I was. So I spent the first half of my life traveling and experiencing things abroad and away, and now I'm very much involved in the community and the micro community that is my neighborhood. And so I started this business improvement area. The BIA kind of stands for, you know, we act as a few things, but essentially we are trying to kind of better the business community in Bridgeland in a nutshell.
Cool.
We do that through various different ways. And so I founded it, pandemic hits, that's been interesting. So it just seems like every time something happens, we just got to add a few more layers on top of it.
Did you know you had that in you? You know, the vision and the drive it takes to like start something like that, because you see a bigger picture. Do you know that? Did you know that was in you, or was it something that you're just like, now that you're here in Bridgeland and you see what's missing that you can kind of help out, or like where's like it's such a, you're gonna open a business and now all of a sudden you're on the backside, you're doing so much more.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure eventually I am getting tired.
Yeah.
You know,
it's a lot.
It is a lot. You know, it is a lot, particularly through a pandemic, no less. You know, starting a business during a pandemic, founding a non-for-profit during a pandemic. You know, doing both of those simultaneously during a pandemic. It has been exhausting, but it's been very rewarding as well. And, you know, I think to some folks who have not had the opportunity to do much during this time, and I actually feel rather positively towards the work that I was able to do, and kind of working towards that even more. I mean, we've created a brand now for Bridgeland, which will kind of segue into some of the beautification projects that we're doing. We're helping the city actually choose like what kind of lighting and what kind of vibe goes on in Bridgeland.
Cool.
The development permits that come through are all with a little bit of say from our community members and our stakeholders as well. You know, we need more parking, so now the developers need to put more parking in, and little things like that where.
But they're massive.
Yeah.
Like as this thing builds out.
Yeah, but no, I feel like it was always part of who I was. I come from a pretty amazing family with a history of doing cool things. So I feel fortunate to have that mentorship in my life. And
And that's, do you think that's a big piece to all this? You know, just if you grew up in a different environment, it's hard to say, obviously, but
It's hard to say.
But what you did grow up in
Mm-hmm.
has given you a foundation to do all these things.
Yeah. You know, and some of that I created on my own,
Yep.
for sure. As I say, like, you know, we started this podcast talking about traveling, and
Mm-hmm.
I really want to nail that home for some people that might be listening, that the school of life is important, you know, and I learned a lot just by being in some of those experiences, as much as I have through strategically meeting people and learning from them and mentoring under them, and including my family as well. What
do you when you say that the family piece, like, did they say something? Did they guide you? Were they just there as a support system? Like, what do you think that was that helped you?
It's hard, you know.
Anyway, I'll let you think about that for a second, because for me, you know, my family, you know, it wasn't a lot of words. It was more watch and learn, right? Watch mom and dad's work ethic, watch the dedication to the family. It was never like, it was never sit down and being like educated on these things. You know, here's how to make a good decision. Here's why to go this way. So that was my experience. So it was very lead by example.
I would agree with that. You know, even now that my world has come to this smaller community, and I'm so focused on that, I think I'm having more time to self-reflect on those things than ever. But yeah, I would probably agree with you that a lot of it is leading by example, but also allowing me particularly to find my own way.
Yep.
I think was also important. So it's hard to say.
I find it very interesting that, you know, when you asked your dad to say, "Do you want to do this?" he was all in, because it's extra special. It's got to be.
Yeah.
And the location, like all of it, the building, the area, like it's all meant to be.
It feels that way.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. It totally feels that way. And it's so awesome for me. You know, you think about just a little pot shop, and people, it might not be impressive to somebody who doesn't live in that lifestyle or maybe doesn't understand it. But, you know, for us, it's amazing to see how many people come through our doors who are self-medicating, getting themselves off of booze or maybe something else altogether. A lot of past opiate clients and stuff. It's something that is beyond just creating a cannabis brand. That those many lives that have gone into creating this pathway for me to be able to do this too, and kind of having a glimpse into it throughout my life. From, you know, I've had stories. Oh, here's a little thing actually for you that you might not know.
I could say, yeah. Just like, you're ready. Here we go.
So, you know, some people have called it destiny. My birthday is actually on April 20th. So my birthday is 4/20.
Yes, destiny.
Right. So part of that too was that for my birthday growing up, we would always go to the pot protests down at the Vancouver Art Gallery.
No way.
And when I started going there, probably in like 2005, it was, you know, some hippies on little circles, and we would all be smoking pot. And my mom would come and join sometimes, which was really sweet of her just to say that she did it. But it was, I think that really drove it home for me too, is that we would go and do this peaceful protest, not bothering anybody, enjoy some music, some friends, and then all my buddies and I would go out for a really bougie dinner afterwards. And that was always my birthday since I can remember. There was no drama, there was no hangovers, there was nothing like that. And so that's why I always kind of compared, you know, if you were to compare cannabis as one thing to booze as the benchmark, my birthday celebrations always really hit that home for me as to like why I like this culture, why I'm part of this culture. And talking to some of those people that would go to these protests, they had been going there for 30 years prior to me being there. And they remember stories of being beaten by police, having, you know, full SWAT gear, police on horseback, beating them, like, you know, dispersing the crowds. So to see it go from one generation
Yeah.
to me, and then even in my generation going from hippie circles on the front of the Vancouver Art Gallery to 30,000 people down at Sunset Beach with Cypress Hill playing, pretty cool.
Yeah.
So,
And then 15 years from that, you own a business that's...
yeah, exactly. So, and there's so many stories collectively of people that I've met around the world that have been fighting this fight where they're from.
Yep.
And, you know, it's just, it gives me goosebumps to think that I'm the first one. I got to experience a bit of that culture prior to, and that's something that I also really want to instill in my brand and with my little touch of Alena in the industry, is not to forget that culture, not to let it go away, you know, because there is this kind of battle that's going on between corporate cannabis and legacy cannabis. And I don't think it needs to be a battle. It's just that we need to be able to pay homage to that legacy and, for God's sakes, get people out of jail and all the other things that go along with it too.
That sense of community you have, it's caught my attention a number of times in our conversation, because it's been I've had like I've been digging into my own stuff a little bit and trying to understand like why I connect with people and whether it's energy or what they're interested in. And for me, it's community. Like I seem to connect with people that are into community.
There you go.
Have you always known that? You know, now that you can like reflect on it and think about it, obviously it's a big piece, you know, has community always been that way, or has it just been this, did you just navigate that way unconsciously?
It was not always that way. As I said, I traveled alone, right?
Solo.
For most of my beginning of my life. So no, I didn't have a strong community kind of originally. Well, yes and no,
Yeah.
I suppose, right? Like, and I always had a community to come back to, let's put it that way. And I always had a support group to come back to.
Yep.
So that was always really good. But I think that particularly in the cannabis community, because there was stigma and because there was legalities and things like this that kind of got in the way of it, that community was always very close and very much held each other up in that regard as well. You know, even in terms of like privacy and all sorts of stuff that went on that you wouldn't have to normally think about in any other kind of culture that exists necessarily.
Yep.
It did in that culture. So I think that that's a fun one. And then, you know, to segue that into the business community and then being able to kind of just help out, I think that's where I've always, I didn't want to work a job because it didn't do anything for anybody else.
Right.
I always wanted to be in a place of that ability to pass something on, whether that's just being an employer or whether that's being an inspirer or a writer or something. There was always something there that I felt I could give more than just, you know, punching a clock.
Yeah. You need some substance there.
Yeah.
Super cool. I want you to explain the shop, because I find it very interesting on the how you refer to it and what's actually inside there on the art side of things.
Yeah, I guess we've kind of glazed over that.
But this is the thing. Usually this show, I don't really dig into, you know, the nuances of the business, because it's, you know, sometimes it's not authentic. But what you're up to is different. So I'd like to hear it. Yeah,
absolutely. So kind of going back to my art background, I suppose, and that culture, that cannabis culture that exists, you know, a lot of it has been through music. You know, you see a lot of cannabis culture dating back to the 60s and prior to that, even in music and art, has been a huge conduit and a huge collective, I suppose, of people who it kind of went hand in hand.
Yep.
So for me, building a cannabis brand while also being able to support that art community was my homage to that culture that I've referred back to so many times now. So we do an art gallery in our store, and we work with artists to commodify their art onto, you know, various things, dupe cases, our bags, everything else. And we give, you know, cash for that. And they also share in profits with a lot of our accessories that we do as well.
Cool.
And then we don't take a commission with any of the artwork that sells off of our walls. We just want to have that as a safe place for them to show it and to sell it. And it's mutually beneficial for us because we get to look at pretty things all day long.
Yeah, the walls look awesome. Like they're alive. They're not just stark and, corporate and stiff. There's actually some character built in there.
Yeah, exactly.
Do you find that, like the art community, do you have to go find it, or are you finding now that you've been open for a little while that people are like, you're attracting like-minded people, or what's happening right now?
Absolutely. It's hard to curate it when there's so much interest. We definitely want to keep the caliber of art high.
Yep. So
the curation is a combination of things. We definitely work with a lot of artists, but at the same time, we know we're looking for professionals in that realm to support professional artists at that point, and not to be exclusionary in that way, but and you can be a professional as a hobby, but we're looking for people who take it seriously and who really want to contribute to that culture and who do. And so the caliber of art that we get is pretty high end.
Yeah, it's super cool. Who's in there right now?
Her name is McKenna Prather. Is
good
our
plug.
main.
I thought I'd cue you up for that
Thanks.
one.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, McKenna. And I also have Leslie Bergen in there as well. There are two artists that are kind of showing side by side.
Cool.
They're both from Alberta and have some really beautiful art. Leslie kind of works more in pointillism and really cool folksy style. McKenna does this really neat acrylic, and she actually embroiders it as well. So she's got this really unique style. They're beautiful.
Super cool. Where because of how early you were in this industry and what you have right now, where do you, and I know a little bit of what you're doing behind the scenes, but where's this thing going? Like what has to change, and how are you involved in that, or are you not involved, but where's this going?
Oh man.
Loaded question. Maybe it's a different podcast, but I feel like you have a vision of where this thing could potentially go.
Are we talking cannabis or are we talking business?
Cannabis.
Okay.
Or you can blend them. Whatever's top of mind right now.
Well, we've kind of talked about two things. We've talked about the BIA. We've talked about cannabis. Cannabis moves a million miles a minute. It's really hard to keep up with, to be honest with you. Yep. And there is a lot going on just in general. Like there's corporate takeovers, and there's just there's a lot of regulation changes,
yep.
and there's just everything that you can imagine. It's such a different.
It sounds
realm.
Insane from the outside.
It is insane. I mean,
when you're catching media headlines,
yeah,
and it's confusing. I can't imagine what it's like when you're actually in it.
And then add on top of that the politics of all the people involved, and everything. It's wild for sure. So in some ways it's intimidating, but in other ways there's so much opportunity, and I don't know exactly where that lands for a lot of people. I have some ideas that I'm not going to share on camera
don't give it away here.
But there's a lot of opportunity, and in fact, if anybody's listening and is curious, the statistics say that most of the money being made in cannabis isn't actually in cannabis. It's all of the auxiliary stuff. It's the software programs. It's data. It's even delivery services amongst in other provinces. Not so much in Alberta, but there's a lot of opportunity there for a lot of different ways that you can kind of help to connect this. It's a brand new industry, so connecting dots that haven't been done already. I'm finding that there's a lot of women in this industry, and I attribute that to the fact that it's new and it's not an old boys club, so to speak. We're doing it as we go, and that creates hardships, but it also creates a lot of fun opportunities, and to be part of it and to be part of that energy. And that's kind of the slogan with Calgary even, and it's totally true.
You love it.
Yeah.
It's you come alive. Like you just come alive when you're talking about it. It's so cool.
Yeah. It is a cool industry. It's crazy, but you're in hospitality, that high energy, fast paced, multiple things going at once. It's all of those things, and it's where I thrive. I've always done startups, and I thrive in that kind of high stress environment.
Super cool. Do you think that if you could look in a crystal ball and see like 10 years from now, do you picture yourself as like a multiple location owner? Do you picture yourself on the policy side, kind of leading change as like a figurehead kind of thing? If you don't want to answer this, don't answer it. But like, I'm kind of interested to see if you do have a loose vision.
I do. I don't think that the end all is with cannabis for me. It's definitely a part of my personality and my belief system and my everything, that it'll always be there. But I don't necessarily believe that cannabis is where it begins and ends for me.
Interesting.
So cool. There's opportunities and I'm kind of sussing that out right now.
Cool.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. I find it fascinating. And what's really cool about this specific episode is why you and I are talking together, like sitting here chatting together. It's just like the spider web just gets a little bit bigger, right? All of a sudden, and when I said it earlier about just a sense of community, I seem to connect with people that have the same feeling. And it's very interesting to now sitting, this is the second time we've ever met. So it's cool. It's cool this is happening now. So to hear your story and understand how it happened and why it happened and what makes you tick is really cool for me to hear it, because it's another cool person in Calgary doing something awesome, which is...
Thanks for saying that.
Yeah.
And your podcast has been really awesome for connecting those people, because that's one thing I love about Calgary is that it's a big city, but it almost has this quaint vibe to it, this small town vibe. I always run into people I know everywhere I go. But
we were joking about that when I came up to your shop to check it out. It's like the Bridgeland mayor.
Feels like it sometimes for good and for bad. But even outside of that, it's great to connect with you and the people that and to hear some outside stuff, but all of these great Calgarians doing really cool things. And a lot of them are young and just getting it out there. And I love that. That's what I love about Calgary, is that it really is that place of opportunity for particularly young people, but just people in general, I would say.
What's crazy, you answered the question before I asked it. Like the only question I ask any guest is when I say Calgary, where's your head go? And you just kind of...
Yeah, I knew you were going there.
I know, you just beat me there. You're not supposed to. You just got to wait till I get there and then go.
That's funny. I thought about this because I knew this question was going to be asked, and I did think about it. And I think that, the Tourism Calgary did a great job at branding Calgary because, in the beginning, when I first came here, the slogan was Heart of the New West. And to me, that had fun connotations to it, because the New West still has that kind of bad boy, cowboy kind of vibe to it, which for somebody, starting a cannabis thing, I kind of feel that way a little bit, maybe a little bit bad boy, cowboy deep down, but then also the New West, meaning, progressive and being part of it. And then the new slogan is be part of the energy. And I think that they did a great job with both of those slogans, because, as somebody who's transplanted themselves here permanently as an adult, but having visited it throughout my whole life, Calgary was not a place I wanted to be in the 90s. God, you couldn't have paid me to live here. But now it's really happening. There's a lot going on, and the energy here is infectious, and the people here are great, and the community here is awesome, and that kind of homegrown vibe to it too. There seems to be a lot more generosity here than I've experienced elsewhere, and progressive, but also a tinge of conservative. And I think it's that perfect balance between the two. And I'm really just fortunate to be here and to be part of it.
It's cool.
Yeah.
Super cool. Like I said, it's been really cool to hear your story.
Well, thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's more than just a little pot shop in Bridgeland. There's much more going on. So thanks for taking the time. I know you're super busy, so I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
And we'll link you up and everything below.
Okay.
Thank you.
Cheers.